We are on. Thank you, Dr. Azi, to accept my invitation and appear on a world holiday, to come on my podcast. And thank you very much. And it's a Monday, so it's a even busier day for everyone. And of course, I believe it's a busier day for you as well. And yeah, this is a general podcast, and I'm not gonna put or push my opinions on whatever we discuss. It's just understanding what you think of, certain things and what I think of, and that's it. So that is how, we keep it light, we keep it nice. And that is how I would like to run this podcast. So yeah, doctor, I would like to know something, basic introduction about yourself so that, before we go ahead with the podcast.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I am 43 years old. I'm married. I have four children between the ages of 6 and 19.
Okay.
And I live in Israel. I moved to Israel from Los Angeles in 2015. And my background is in education. I have 3 degrees in education and sociology and teaching. And I have gotten into the space of communications, media, and advocacy, most
Okay.
recently, advocacy. And that's a little bit about me.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm just a regular guy. I work in the shipping industry, oil industry, and I do podcasts for fun. And this is my fun time on a Monday afternoon. So, yeah, I mean, that's about it. And I will not waste much time. I would like to address the elephant in the room in a very, light way. So, with this
Sure.
situation of the war going on, you know, of course, I mean, people have already forgotten about the Russian war. So that's what this one has done. We've all suddenly forgotten the Russia-Ukraine war. But I would like to understand, because yeah, there are, you read social media. I mean, I am an avid consumer of the social media as well, unfortunately. So a lot of us are. We read and we believe. So people are reading, people are believing things. There are people from both sides who are writing things, and people of both sides who are throwing stones and pelting stones on each other. So I would like to know, living in Israel, what is the general, reaction of the people living over there? Like, what do they think about this? That is what my, first question is. When your country is enraged in
Sure,
war.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think you touched on something really important, which is that the majority of people, especially the younger generations, are receiving most of their information, including news, from social media. And they're doing so in a way that's not necessarily fact checking or looking at the accuracy. And the systems that we have in place are not doing that either. So we have recent data that China is controlling the algorithm in terms of the pro Hamas, pro terror content versus anything other than that, anything that speaks against that, because China has political alliances with the funders of Hamas, which are tied directly to the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar, Iran. And so there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes that the average, 18 to 20, 24 year old and even the older demographics are not aware of and they're not seeing. And so that particular movement, namely the Muslim Brotherhood movement, has gotten into the academia and gotten into the media in such ways over the last 70, 74 years since their inception. And it's been done very strategically, and there are media strategies that are put in place so that you and I and anyone else with a
Yeah.
heart is going to have sympathy for the victim. And so what we have here is we have victim versus oppressor. So that's what this appears to look like on social media. And even further than that, there is a facade that this is Israel versus Palestine. Okay. Now, what we have to recognize right now is that just yesterday, there was an uprising in Gaza of the Arabs who live in Gaza against Hamas. Okay. Now, why did this happen? Under pressure from America, because Israel is a disproportionately humanitarian country when we compare Israel to other countries, even in the West, Israel has been sending significant amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And the Hamas operatives, the terrorists, this is a known classified terror organization,
Yeah.
has been intercepting the aid to the point that the citizens do not have access. And yesterday, because of the hunger and because of the desperation, there was an uprising in order to receive those necessary humanitarian aid. And Hamas started firing in the streets, and a young teenager was murdered in the streets by Hamas. And now we have videos circulating social media from inside Gaza that are time stamped with the geolocation of inside of Gaza. And they are speaking out against the Hamas government, actually having a civil uprising against their own quote unquote government. Why do I say quote unquote? Gaza, the situation in Gaza is much more complex than people think. And, you asked as an Israeli, what are Israelis thinking? What are Israelis feeling? What are Israelis feeling? I'll tell you one thing that 99.9% of Israelis have in common. We did not want this war. We do not want this war. We did not choose this war. And Israelis have been educated to understand the plight of who we are calling the Palestinians. And we have been educated to understand that we've been educated, I shouldn't say understand, we've been educated to believe in our systems that there's a possibility for peace and a possibility for two states. And that's often looked to in the Western world as a solution to what appears to be the problem. Because what appears to be the problem and what has been posed to be the problem by Hamas, the terror organization, and their parent organization, the Muslim Brotherhood, is that this is some type of a land grab. And we can trace the roots of this narrative back to Yasser Arafat in the late 60s, who coined the term Palestinian as a nationality, as a group, as an identity. He reinforced this identity, created a flag, and created the Palestinian Liberation Organization that is founded upon violent jihad. It has roots in violent global jihad, and it has been carried out locally against innocent Israeli civilians. So in spite of all of that, when you look at the Israeli education system and when it's been analyzed by third-party objective sources, we see that the narrative we've been taught, Avi Brata, is one of peace and coexistence. On the other hand, the Hamas government actively utilizes a UN-funded curriculum. When we look at 1,000 texts in that curriculum, we find that number one, there's no mention of Israel as a state. Number two, there is no mention of any such word as two states, coexistence, cooperation, or peace. The stated explicit goals of this curriculum that is being taught from preschool all the way through to the teenage and adult years is a explicit curriculum inciting violent terrorism to the point of suicide, martyrdom against civilians. So to conclude, what you are seeing on social media, by and large, is a fictitious narrative that has been designed by the Muslim Brotherhood for you to align yourself with radical ideologies of radicalized Islamic terror in conjunction with Iran, China, and everyone who is working to actively disempower and destroy the West.
Wow. I mean, a lot of it actually makes sense also when you said all of those points, a lot of it, because, I hear a lot of, interviews, and I've been reading a lot of interviews, and the points which you raised, some of those I've actually seen people say. And let me even give you an example. I have a Twitter account. I'm not an Israeli, I'm not a Palestinian. I have a normal Twitter account. I go there, I look up sports, politics, anything what's going on in the world. And you know what's trending every day, and you'll be very surprised, or probably what's trending every day is a very you know negative, what do you say, uh, a negative trend against Israel. And that's what I've been reading. And the thing is, I don't want to, sit here and be the judge or anything. We are not being a judge. But as a social media commentator, I mean, of course, you read something, you comment. So you create a mindset in your head that, oh, okay, so that's happening with Israel. Oh, okay, that's happening with Israel. Israel, and you keep reading that, and after a while, the moment you start reading such things on social media, the algorithm works in a way that you're only fed with information like that. So at the end of the day, a person
Exactly.
who's who's reading a negative Israeli comment goes on consuming that for the whole month. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that's how I think opinions have been formed. That's how, I mean, people are comparing Israeli president with Putin. And well, I think you have even, I don't know if you have read those things, but it comes, people are comparing, oh, here is Putin and here is the president of Israel, how they are, commissioning genocide. But then this is not a genocide. I'm from India, and I know what the meaning of genocide is. I know what has happened in, our states in Kashmir. And, you know, well, it's not the right way to put it. And I can very well agree with your statement of China funded algorithm, which is actually you know taking this somewhere else. Because I mean, there are people in our country also who have, say, varied opinions. But then I see a stark difference between people on ground having an opinion and people on social media. They're totally different. And I'm like, okay, but the people I know, they don't think that way. Then why do people on social media think that way? So I haven't
Yes.
met many people, I haven't met many pro-Israeli people that way. Wherever I read, whomsoever I talk to, like Palestine, I'm like, okay, but as a news consumer, let's understand both sides. Let us also talk to people from Israel as well. That is very important to analyze or understand the subject matter. For me also, to understand this as a subject matter, you can't like you can't like say, okay, people are dying, let's not even, I don't want to talk about that. It's happening. You can't just show one side and
Yeah.
forget about the other side totally. So that's what we have done. and
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
and yeah, I mean, so that is what I wanted to know. I mean, thanks for telling me. That is what I wanted to know, like, what do people think of? And because again, Israel has been a
Sure.
country with,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Israel has been a
I can,
country
you
with,
know, I can share a little bit more with you
yeah.
about why this is so tragic. Why is it so tragic that the media is overly focused on Israel and really positioning Israel as some kind of enemy and comparing our prime minister to the leadership of Russia, Putin? Why is that so tragic? First, number one, when you look at the data that if 20,000 Gazans have been killed by Israeli forces since October 7th, and even if the Hamas reported data is true, that 10,000 of those are civilians, that is still a ratio of 1 to 1. When you look at any other war over the past 100 years, you will never find a number as low as 1 to 1. Now, why is that? The reason for that is two things. Israel takes extreme precaution before targeting anyone in the region. Are they doing a perfect job? Absolutely not. They're operating under extreme stress, extremely difficult conditions. But even so, you have that number that is lower in multiples by any other war in the entire world. Now, number two, problem for Israel and problem for that number, and why that number would be even lower, is that if it weren't for Hamas, is that Hamas operatives are operating in plain clothes. They're wearing jeans and t-shirts, oftentimes even not wearing shoes, and they're launching missiles. And you know what's so sad is that we have a significant percentage of their missiles that have been misfired, and they're so low tech that they're actually killing their own civilians. And so we don't actually have data on who's who. So we just have that number of civilians, and yet a significant proportion of them are being killed by Hamas inside. So that's one piece. Now, the second piece, it's extremely difficult. What Hamas is doing to their children and people within their society is that they're using them as human shields. And so a lot of people will ask, how is it that Israel can go in and target innocent civilians? But the bottom line is that Hamas is not giving us any choice. We are trying to take out the infrastructure that has been repeatedly and violently and viciously attacking our civilians now for decades. And it reached a pinnacle on October 7th to the point that we can no longer ignore this threat because it is so severe and so significant that I myself and my children and all of my neighbors, some of which are Jewish, we have Christians, we have Arabs, we have Bedouins, we have Muslims, Jews, every religion, we have Baha'i. Everyone in Israel can live in peace. We have a thriving LGBTQ community. We are welcoming. We have so much freedom. And we're talking about being targeted by a society that has nothing like that. The entire society within the Palestinian Authority within Gaza is devoid of freedom. There's no freedom of speech. You cannot speak out against the government. If you are LGBTQ, your fate is execution. 1 year before October 7th, on October 7th, 2022, there was a boy from the Palestinian Authority. Now, this is the government under the so-called moderate Abbas. This is about a 15-minute drive away from my home here in central Israel, that this young man had to seek asylum in Israel because of his death threats. Now, unfortunately, on October 7th, 2022, he was kidnapped from Israel, brought into the Palestinian Authority, and then executed. So we have to ask ourselves the question, why is it that we are not questioning the government of Hamas that is statistically creating multiples and multiples of grievances, of violent attacks, of you name it, every human rights violation against their own people? And we have Israel who, we're fighting, we have an army, an official army that is working under the regulations of the most highly regulated army in the world by way of its humanitarianism. And yet the microscope is on us. So Avi Brata, what I want to ask you is, why is the world not focusing on the Arab against Arab violence that's happening all around us? We've seen the largest number of deaths in Syria over the past 20 years in this region. And we're talking about people who are part of the Palestinian refugee census. And so why is it that the world is not up in arms about that? Why is the world not up in arms about the fact that in Iran, they've had 25 executions in the last 30 days? And these are for people who do nothing more than remove their headscarf. That do nothing more than express their outspokenness against the regime, the oppressive regime that has been controlling Iran. And we have this generation of young voices who are trying to speak out and trying to peacefully protest. And yet we have this terroristic regime that is absolutely terrorizing, oppressing, and even executing these civilians. And this is in our neighborhood. And yet the world chooses to focus on Israel. So we have to ask ourselves, what is behind that? What is the motive? Now, we have 100 million members of the Muslim Brotherhood who've actively called for the immediate destruction of Israel, Jews, and who have called for taking over the entire Western world with a radical Islamic caliphate. And we are turning a blind eye and yet focusing on the smallest minority religion on the planet, okay, of the major religions that we would think about: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism. We have, how many Jews are in the world? I mean, can you take a guess? Perhaps you know.
I would be wrong. Yeah, please Please go ahead and tell me the correct number.
7 billion people in the world, of which just take a guess. Throw out a number. 7 billion people in the world. How many Jews?
Like what? A million? How many?
Okay, so we have 14 million Jews in the world, which is 0.02% of the population. So we're talking about just looking at those radicalized Muslims that are 100 million in the Muslim Brotherhood, and then you take the total number of Jews, which is 14 million, and you just do the math there, and you think about if they're setting up systems within academia and the media and social media, just numbers wise, we are so
low,
far outnumbered by, and that's just the radicals, So we can get a better sense of the situation by looking at the data and looking at the numbers, and then having the capacity to really step back. And this takes a very, very special person to step back and ask oneself, am I analyzing this critically? Am I looking at the motives underneath this post and who's posting it and what they want? Am I continuing to tell myself something that is convenient? Am I continuing to tell myself something and prove to myself that I'm right? Or am I staying open to facts and looking beneath the surface and challenging the status quo and understanding what is actually going on here? And am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem?
I mean, what you say actually makes a lot of sense. I live in Dubai, but I'm going to give my views anyways. What's happening in Iran? We have all been reduced to protests. That's it. Like a little bit of protests Iranians can't even protest, so they can't do anything. So yeah, the whole world has turned a blind eye to what has happened for over a year, and what has happened, and devastating stories come out every single month. And I know this. I made a short film with an Iranian actress, and it was
Wow.
about it was about premature sex, and the topic was bold, it was taboo, it was just a short film, and I was asked to remove it because I did take it off. I was asked to remove it because it posed a certain threat to her. So yeah, fair enough. Come on, it's not that important. So
That's an important topic. That's a really important topic. And it's a widespread problem, especially for women, young women, and even boys. In several of the radicalized regions.
Even similar stories. What happened in Afghanistan? And last year, I think, when Taliban came back, and you see what is their condition again. What happened in Afghanistan now is what US wanted to avoid for 20 years. And well, again, Taliban is back again, and you can see when you open the Twitter handle someday, the education minister of Taliban is holding a gun, and yeah, well, there's not really much. And yes, the world has turned a blind eye, and just it's been, I think, 2-3 years when Israelis were granted uh, I think they were started to being granted visas to come to Dubai again. I think again this was an issue.
Yes.
I think for last 4-5 years, because I did not know much about world politics 5 years back, and I've always wanted to travel the world, and Israel, Lebanon, and these are some countries which fascinate me. I would like to go there. So when you open Google, the first thing Google tells you is countries you cannot visit if you have an Israel stamp on your passport. These are the things which the world has made you believe. The world has they put forward such unimportant facts. Well, see, if you have stamps of certain nations, you cannot go certain places. I've been to Russia, so basis that stamp, I can never enter United States of America. So yeah, these are unimportant things. Okay, these are geopolitical things. I am from India. If you have a Pakistan stamp, it becomes so difficult for to travel anywhere. There are things which Well, but what I'm saying is, negative publicity and negative talk has been there in the media, and when I see a lot of government officials from India, were actually stating that this is the time where Israel should actually completely, demolish Hamas, and a
Yes.
lot of such talks were there, and a lot of such talks should be there, and the fact that people don't realize it's not a country versus country war. It's not like Israel is going after, you know demolishing Palestine. No, this is not the case. And but the thing which trends on Twitter is Israel versus Palestine. Israel demolishes
Of
Palestine. No,
course.
that's not the
Of
case.
course.
And a lot of that, today my podcast was basically, because of course, in 2023, yeah, the worst part is we have stopped reading printed media. We have stopped watching real news. And unfortunately, the whole, facade of news is Twitter and all that nonsense. Unfortunately, yes, Twitter is a great place for entertainment, but I think that's about it. Beyond that, yes, the news consumed over there, there is a lot of proof that a lot of that is so much nonsense. And yeah, I mean, time and time again, when we go back and fact check, there is a lot of news which is just generated out of nothing. And
Yeah, yeah, it's really true, and it's interesting, Abibrata. I'm not sure if you've heard this story yet. It hasn't been publicized too widely, but there's a woman. Her name is Dalia Ziada. She's Dr. Dalia Ziada. She's Egyptian. She's a Muslim. And after October 7th, it's interesting because Israel and Egypt have been on relatively peaceful terms for many years now, to the point that we have 200,000 Israelis who visit Egypt every year and feel relatively safe. Now, after October 7th, that changed. And Dalia Ziada went on to the news and she discovered that nowhere in the news was it talking about the heinous violence that was carried out against Israelis on October 7th. Now, if anyone saw this, what actually happened, we see that it is not resistance. It's the worst humanitarian violations that we can imagine. And I don't need to go into graphic detail unless you'd like more information for your listeners. But what Dalia Ziada did is she saw that and she went on her social media on her phone and she spoke out against the absolute irresponsibility of the news channels all over Egypt that were omitting important facts and swaying public opinion against Israel for all the wrong reasons. Now, she speaks out on social media and she immediately gets death threats and she immediately gets legitimate threats to be put in prison for life for speaking out against the Egyptian media. She, with the help of the people that her network in Egypt, was able to escape for her life and go into hiding and exile. So she is no longer living in her home country of Egypt, but she continues to speak out. And we are talking about so many people, countless people, millions, if not a billion people who do not have the fundamental rights of free speech, who are not able to access anything in terms of free press, and are therefore living their lives without fundamental facts about the realities of what are happening in the world, and without the ability to have discussions outside of their immediate echo chamber and connect with anyone with differing opinions or even different experiences. So I'm very interested, Abibrata, in not only the challenges, the real difficulties that Israel is being faced with in terms of this violent attack and this constant existential threat, also with the rapid rise of anti-Semitism, but also I on the daily think about the Gazan mothers, these mothers in Gaza who have no way to ensure the safety of their children because the government has not instituted any form of safety measures or defense mechanisms
yeah,
to protect the citizens, but rather they've invested, they've
yeah,
wasted every single cent of the billions and millions of dollars that are being funneled in yearly in order to build tunnels of terror and create a sophisticated infrastructure of terror, taking fundamental resources away from their civilians, and then subjecting their children to a terror curriculum, training them to be suicidal martyrs. What must it be like to be a mother in that society, and that same mother who is objected to abuse, an abuse that is condoned by the government, by the system in place in that region. She is abused against her will, oftentimes in violent ways, with absolutely no ability to protect herself or defend herself or get out of the situation. So my heart breaks most for those who are being subjected to these humanitarian crises. And as an Israeli, as an American, as a self-identifying human being with who values freedom, I cannot stand idly by. I cannot be silent. I will not be silent, because I care for that woman in Gaza who is absolutely a prisoner of an oppressive regime, who cannot take care of her child. I will not be silent for her. And the battle that Israel is fighting for its life is the battle that it's fighting for the freedom of the oppressed people around this globe.
Understood. Agreed. And yeah, I mean, totally nothing to disagree. And I think even for the people who are watching, who will watch this podcast, can actually now go ahead, and do a fact check themselves and understand the dynamics. I think, you know, more often than, yeah, I mean, what I wanted basically, from this podcast, the whole, objective was to understand an Israeli's point of view, somewhere over there, what do they have to say? Of course, you know people have opinions, but this is more than opinion. This is something. Now, you have given me enough information. You have given us enough information to go back, now Google objectively, and I think there will be a lot of story which is just hidden, which just don't come to us. And yeah, I mean, thank you, doctor. I mean, this is a
It's
lot of
true. Yeah.
lot of
It's it's it's
information.
it's absolutely true.
It's a lot of
You know, Avi
information.
Brata,
Yeah,
if you Google the name of the boy that was murdered yesterday in Gaza, you won't find it anywhere. It's nowhere to be
yeah,
found,
yeah, yeah.
because Israel was not the oppressor. And so, you know, we're dealing with that, and I think it has to be kept in mind. But I so appreciate your open-mindedness and your willingness to build bridges and be open to new ideas and opinions, and I really commend you for that. And you know, that's really you're setting an example for so many people to follow in your footsteps.
Thank you very much, doctor. And just before we close the podcast, I just wanted to cover one last topic. I know we are running out of time. Just one last topic. With all this war, in Israel, so like you spoke about what Israelis are thinking, but I just wanted to know, like, is there a situation where, I know from many places, like, when something happens, the first thing you think is, I'm gonna leave the country. I'm just going. I'm going to US, I'm going to UK, I'm going to Europe, I'm going to Netherlands, I'm going to Dubai, I'm going to Abu Dhabi. Is there a situation like that in Israel, or do you think, and unfortunately, a situation like this will arise where people are just like, what, leave it. Let's just go away from this, and we get back. Do you see something like this happening, or I'm just guessing?
You know,
I'm
it's
just
interesting. It's
overestimating.
interesting you should ask, you know, and I'll tell you, Avi Barata, there are certain people who have left the country just for like a mental health break. Listen, if I were, God forbid, in Gaza, I would get out of there as fast as possible. But in terms of being an Israeli in this country, I mean, even as an American, I look at the numbers. And what we see from the numbers are there are more people who have come to Israel than actually left Israel since October 7th. So there's a feeling of solidarity among people around the world for Israel, because being that Israel is the only Jewish country in the entire world, we have no choice. but to fight for our existence and our survival. And we've been doing it in modern history for 75 years. And beyond, before the UN partition plan, we've been doing this, and then if we want to go back further, we've been doing this for 3,500 years against some of the largest armies and empires in the world who are no longer. And so we carry the hope, and we carry the flame of hope, and hope for victory. And that victory is not just for us. The victory is really for freedom of people around the world and human rights. So I'm not going anywhere. And when I was asked by a relative who said to me, well, you have American citizenship and you can get on an emergency flight out of here. And I thought about that for a minute. And in my heart, I knew at that moment that I am an American, before I am an American, I am an Israeli. And I look around my country and I ask myself, as an American, if I were to leave, where would everyone else go? Where would all the people go who don't have dual citizenship? And then if they were to leave, God forbid, who would be here to defend our land? And so, to answer your question on one foot, I am never leaving.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, doctor, you are very courageous, and I think your knowledge on this subject matter is massive. And I think I'll have to probably book myself another podcast some other day to just
Thank
touch
you so
upon
much.
other
Thank
topics
you for
because
thank you for
yeah.
your time. Is the recording finished? I just had a quick question for you. Should I ask you now or?
Let me stop the recording. Well,
Okay.
thank you everyone stopping the